The courtroom was silent. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights, the click of a camera shutter, and the sound of someone's nervous breathing. Shallow and uneven. In the front row, a woman with streaks of gray in her hair clenched a crumpled tissue in both hands, her eyes hollow, fixed on the girl standing before the judge. 16-year-old Mara Ellison looked like a shadow of herself, pale, trembling, eyes red from nights without sleep. She wasn't crying anymore. She had cried herself empty weeks ago. Now she simply stared at the polished wood of the defense table, a strand of hair falling over her face, as Judge Raymond Price read the sentence. "Life imprisonment," he said, his voice even, unshaken, without the possibility of parole. The words dropped like a hammer. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. A man in the back muttered, "She's just a kid." But no one dared speak louder than a whisper. The sound of the gavel echoed once. Final, decisive. The bailiff stepped forward. Mara's lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. She didn't look at her mother. She didn't look at the reporters, or the rows of strangers who had turned her life into a spectacle. She simply whispered one word, almost inaudible. Eli, her brother's name. Then she was led away. 2 years ago, the Ellison family had looked like something out of a suburban magazine. Quiet house on Birchfield Lane. White fence, family photos on the walls, a golden retriever asleep by the fireplace. But inside that house the air was heavy. You could feel it even as a guest. The silences stretched too long. The father's voice carried too sharply. The mother moved like she was walking on glass. Eli Ellison was 17, athletic, charming, the kind of boy teachers liked and other kids envied. His sister Mara was quieter, top of her class, a little withdrawn with the kind of intelligence that frightened adults. She'd spend hours in her room sketching, listening to music that her parents called strange. Their father, David Ellison, was a former police officer turned private security consultant. Strict, old-fashioned, and impossible to please. Their mother, Janet, played peacekeeper, often standing between father and children when tempers flared. Neighbors said the family was normal. That's what they always say before something terrible happens. It started small. Arguments. Slammed doors. A broken phone. Police called once for a domestic misunderstanding. David had a temper. So did Eli. Mara, though, was always the quiet one. Or so everyone thought. But according to the police report later unsealed at trial, there had been something darker happening behind those closed doors. It wasn't about a single fight or a burst of teenage anger. It was about months of tension, years even, pressure building inside a house that pretended to be perfect. Eli had been found dead in his bedroom on a rainy Saturday night. 1 gunshot to the chest. No signs of forced entry. The weapon was registered to their father. Mara was the only one home. She told police it was an accident. "I thought someone broke in," she said during the 911 call. Her voice was shaking, breathless. "I heard something. I didn't know it was him." But investigators found inconsistencies. The timeline didn't match. Her story shifted. Small details first, then bigger ones. And then detectives found her diary. Inside, scribbled in shaky handwriting. "He won't stop. No one believes me. If I disappear, it's because of him." Detective Laura Finch, who led the case, had been on the force for 20 years. She'd seen homicides, child abuse, even gang executions. But something about Mara's case disturbed her deeply. The way the girl avoided eye contact. The way she seemed terrified one minute and blank the next. Finch spent weeks digging into the Ellison household. The school records, the neighbors, the teachers. Everyone said the same thing. Eli was outgoing, popular, confident. Mara was strange, quiet, sometimes cold. But one teacher, Mrs. Riley, mentioned something different. She wrote an essay last year, Mrs. Riley told Finch, about fear, about living in a cage with someone who smiles at you every morning. That essay later became a key piece of evidence for the prosecution. But what no one knew then, not the police, not even Finch, was that the truth behind that essay was far more complicated than anyone imagined. The trial was brutal. The prosecution painted Mara as a jealous, manipulative girl with a violent streak. They showed the jury photos of her gun training with her father, her internet searches, how to disable home alarm system, gunshot distance chest wound. Can minors get parole for murder? Every headline screamed, "Sister kills brother in cold blood." But the defense argued something entirely different. That Mara had been living in fear for months, that she was provoked, that Eli had been violent behind closed doors, yet the family refused to testify. Her mother wouldn't take the stand. Her father invoked the Fifth Amendment. To the jury, that silence looked like guilt. The day before sentencing, Detective Finch visited Mara in juvenile detention. The girl sat on the other side of the glass, her hands cuffed, hair tucked behind her ears. "Why don't you tell me what really happened that night?" Finch asked softly. Mara looked up, her eyes steady. "You already decided what happened," she said. Finch leaned forward. "No, I didn't. But if there's something I missed, it won't change anything," Mara interrupted. "They needed someone to blame, and he's not here to defend himself." She smiled faintly, a strange, sad smile. "But neither am I." When Finch left the room, she couldn't shake the feeling that the girl wasn't lying, at least not completely. There was something missing from the puzzle, something she hadn't seen yet. 3 weeks after sentencing, Finch got a call from a former forensics analyst, someone she trusted. He'd gone over the ballistic data again for a training seminar and noticed something odd. The angle of the bullet. It hadn't come from where Mara said she was standing. It came from lower, almost as if someone had been sitting on the ground when they fired. The shot was upward, not downward, and the powder residue on the walls didn't match the report. Someone had cleaned the scene. Badly. Finch froze. If that was true, it meant someone tampered with the evidence before police arrived. Someone who knew how to make a crime scene look like a domestic tragedy. Someone like David Ellison, an ex-cop. That's when the story stopped being simple. Finch reopened the evidence quietly. No paperwork, no official motion, just curiosity. She pulled the body cam footage from that night, slowed it down frame by frame. In one clip, just a few seconds long, she saw David standing in the hallway while officers processed the scene. His shirt was clean, but his right hand was bandaged. The report never mentioned an injury. She checked the timestamp. He had arrived before the ambulance, before the coroner. He wasn't supposed to be in the house at all, and in the corner of the video, barely visible, the gun on the table was in a different position than in the official photos. Someone had moved. Finch leaned back in her chair, her pulse rising. The entire case, the conviction, the testimony, the sentence, might have been built on a lie. But why would a father let his daughter take the fall? And why would Mara accept it? When Finch visited Mara again months later, she brought no files, no notes, just a photo. The bandaged hand. She placed it on the table. "Was it your father?" she asked quietly. Mara stared at the photo for a long time. Her jaw trembled, but she said nothing. Finch waited. A full minute passed. Then Mara whispered, "He said no one would believe me anyway." And that was when Finch realized the true horror of it all. Finch didn't sleep that night. The image of Mara's face, that broken whisper, "He said no one would believe me anyway," looped in her mind like a warning. She'd heard victims say similar things before, but never with that kind of calm finality. It wasn't fear anymore. It was acceptance, the kind that comes from being silenced for too long. She poured herself another cup of black coffee and opened the old case files on her laptop. Crime scene photos, ballistic diagrams, witness statements. She went through them one by one, highlighting inconsistencies she'd ignored back then, tiny ones that had seemed irrelevant at the time. At 2:47 a.m., she noticed something strange in the original statement from David Ellison. He claimed he was working a private job across town the night of the shooting. The time on his signed log said 9:15 p.m. He'd checked in at a client's gated property. But the 911 call from Mara was logged at 9:42 p.m., and officers arrived by 9:51. According to the call log, David was already at the house by 9:56. That meant he somehow crossed the entire city, a 35-minute drive, in 11 minutes. It was impossible. The next morning, Finch drove to the old Birchfield Lane neighborhood. The Ellison house stood exactly as it had a year ago. Blinds drawn, lawn overgrown, a mailbox still bearing the family name. The property was up for sale now, but unoccupied. She parked across the street and stared for a long time. There was something haunting about houses that had held violence. They seemed to breathe differently, like they remembered. She slipped on latex gloves, used her old department key to let herself through the side gate, and stepped into the backyard. The winter air carried the smell of damp soil and rust. The back door lock had been replaced. New deadbolt, new knob. But she wasn't here for that. She wanted to see the shed. David Ellison's workshop. Inside, it smelled of oil and gun cleaner. Tools hung on a pegboard. The workbench was covered in old rags, bits of electrical wire, and a few rusted nails. But on the far shelf, Finch found something that shouldn't have been there. A small wooden box, half open, containing 3 bullets, identical caliber to the murder weapon, and a rag with faint brown stains. She lifted the rag. Underneath was a flash drive. Her pulse kicked. She slipped it into her jacket pocket and left. That night, in her apartment, Finch plugged the drive into an old laptop. It contained exactly 3 files. No names, no folders, just img0932.mp4, img0933, mp4, img0934, mp4. The first one was shaky phone footage. The camera was aimed at the Ellison living room. You could hear David's voice. Angry, low, controlled. "You think you can go running your mouth again? After what happened last time?" A girl's voice went trembling. "Mara," he started at Dad. Enough!" A loud crack, maybe a slap, echoed. Then silence. Finch paused the video, her throat tightening. She clicked on the next one. The second clip was shorter. The same room, maybe a different night. Eli was there this time. He was smirking, half drunk, taunting her. "Go ahead, tell him what you told your teacher. See what happens." David's voice again, sharper. "You shut your mouth, boy." The camera wobbled, then cut off abruptly. Finch hesitated before opening the final file. It was time-stamped the night of the murder. The camera faced a hallway, dim, shaky, the sound of rain outside. Then a voice whispered, "He's coming." Mara's voice. You could hear footsteps, heavier ones. David's? Then Eli's voice, angry, louder, echoing from the bedroom. "You think you can tell them lies about me? You think they'll believe you over me?" A scuffle, something crashing. A scream, then a single gunshot. The camera dropped to the floor. The recording ended. Finch sat frozen, her hand over her mouth. She replayed the clip twice more, slowing the final seconds. There were 2 figures in that hallway just before the shot. One taller, one smaller. The taller shadow was moving toward the bedroom. The smaller one, Mara's, flinched and stepped back. The muzzle flash came from the direction of the taller figure. Finch's heart pounded. The shot didn't come from Mara's position at all. It came from someone behind her. That flash drive wasn't just evidence. It was a confession. The next day, Finch met her former captain for lunch, unofficially. She needed someone she could trust. She showed him only part of what she'd found. "Laura," he said, voice heavy. "You realize what you're suggesting? That a former cop tampered with a homicide scene to frame his own daughter?" She nodded slowly. "Do you know what kind of hell that opens up? The department won't touch it. The DA won't reopen a case that's already closed." Finch stirred her coffee, eyes distant. "I don't care who it pisses off. A 16-year-old is going to die in prison for a crime she didn't commit." Her captain sighed. "Then be careful. If you're right, you're not the only one who knows what's on that drive." That night her apartment was broken into. Nothing stolen, nothing broken. Just the laptop, left open on her desk, with the flash drive gone. Finch stood in the dark, staring at the empty USB port. Whoever it was, they wanted her to know they'd been there. No forced entry, no fingerprints. Professional. And in her gut, she knew exactly who it was. David Ellison. He'd found out. The next morning, Finch requested a visitor's pass at the women's correctional facility. Mara was surprised to see her. "You shouldn't be here," Mara said quietly as she sat down. Her hands were cuffed to the table, eyes darting to the security camera overhead. "I know," Finch said, sliding a piece of paper across. A printed frame from the final video. The muzzle flash, Mara's breath caught. She stared at it for a long time. "You found it. Your father's been covering this up, hasn't he?" Mara's lip quivered, but she didn't cry. "He told me he'd make it look like I did it, that nobody would ever believe me. And he was right. Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because," Mara said softly, "he said if I ever told anyone, Mom would be next." Finch's jaw tightened. "Where's your mother now?" Mara hesitated. "She's gone." He moved her out of state. That night, Finch made a call to a contact in records. Janet Ellison's name didn't appear anywhere in recent databases. Not in driver's license updates, not in utility bills, not even hospital records. It was like she'd vanished. Finch went deeper, using a contact in private investigation. Within a week, she had something. A rental lease in another name, Janet Dale, same birth date, signed 6 months ago in rural Wyoming. The emergency contact listed? David Ellison. Finch drove 15 hours straight. When she arrived, the cabin sat alone on a gravel road surrounded by pine trees. Smoke curled from the chimney. The sound of wind was the only thing breaking the silence. She parked, walked to the porch, and knocked twice. A woman opened the door. Thinner, paler, older looking than her age. Her eyes flickered with recognition. "Detective Finch?" she whispered. Finch nodded. "I need to talk about your husband." Janet's lips trembled. "He said you'd come. He said if you did, I should call him." "Please don't," Finch said quickly. "Just tell me what happened that night." Janet looked past her, scanning the trees before stepping aside. "You'd better come in." Inside the cabin, Finch noticed the fear immediately. Every window had double locks. There was a shotgun by the door. Janet's hands shook as she poured tea. "He was always like that," Janet said quietly. "Controlling. Everything had to be perfect. Eli was his favorite. Or maybe just his reflection. Mara was different. He couldn't control her. And that made him angry." Finch listened in silence. "That night," Janet continued, "I wasn't there. He sent me to my sister's. Said he'd handle things between them. I didn't know what he meant." She swallowed hard. "When I came home, the police were already there. He told me not to say a word." "Do you believe Mara shot Eli?" Janet's eyes filled with tears. "No," she whispered. "I think he did. I think he tried to stop one of their fights, and it went wrong. And instead of calling for help, She stopped herself, trembling. "He cleaned it up." Finch leaned forward. "Mrs. Ellison, I need you to testify. If you tell the truth, we can reopen the case." Janet's face went pale. "You don't understand. He still watches me. He has friends. He was a cop for 20 years. If I talk, he'll kill me." And then, a faint crunch outside. Footsteps on gravel. Both women froze. Janet's eyes widened in terror. "He's here." Finch's heart thumped so loudly she feared it might betray her position. The crunch of gravel repeated, deliberate, measured. Whoever it was, they weren't running. They wanted to be seen, or perhaps to intimidate. Janet's hands trembled as she motioned Finch toward the interior, keeping herself between the door and the detective. "He's checking," she whispered. "Don't move." Footsteps paused. Then a voice, low, controlled, calm in a way that made it infinitely more terrifying. "Laura Finch," David Ellison said. "I've been expecting you." Finch stepped forward, keeping her tone neutral. "Step away from the door, David. No one needs to get hurt tonight." He emerged slowly, hands empty, shoulders squared. There was no anger in his voice. Only the quiet, cold calculation of a man used to having absolute control. His eyes flicked briefly to Janet, then back to Finch. "You've been poking around where you don't belong," he said. "And now you've scared my wife. That's not acceptable." Finch's instincts screamed at her. He wasn't bluffing. He had lived in that house for decades, trained as a cop, knew every loophole, every manipulation, and yet she couldn't let him intimidate her. Mara's future, or what remained of it, depended on what happened in the next few minutes. "I'm not leaving without the truth," Finch said. "Your daughter is rotting in prison for a crime she didn't commit. You know that." David smiled faintly, a ghost of humor flickering. "She is what she is. And what she is smart. Too smart for her own good. You think your videos, your flash drives, your little investigation, that changes anything?" "I have evidence," Finch said, moving subtly closer to Janet, positioning her so David couldn't corner both of them. "I have everything I need to reopen the case. You know it. And it's only a matter of time before Mara walks free." David's eyes narrowed. He stepped closer, but Finch didn't flinch. His shadow stretched across the room, large, imposing. The physical embodiment of a threat honed by years of authority. "You think you can intimidate me with a few shaky videos?" he asked. "Those recordings, they're nothing. They could have been anyone. Edited, staged, fabricated. And the DA? They'll side with me because everyone thinks I'm a good man. Everyone trusts me." Finch's hands clenched into fists. "No one trusts you anymore, not me. Not anyone who's looked at the truth. You killed your son and tried to frame your daughter. You know it, I know it. The videos prove it. You cleaned the scene, moved the weapon, lied to the police. And now you're panicking because you think I'll walk out of this cabin and let you keep hiding." David's jaw tightened. He straightened, exhaling slowly. You've been watching Laura, obsessed, and now you're trespassing. That's dangerous. Finch ignored the warning. And you? Threatening your wife, Janet? She's been living in fear for a year because of you. She's done nothing wrong. She wants to tell the truth. You're done controlling her, and you're done controlling Mara. That ends tonight. For a long moment, there was silence. The wind rattled the windows. David's expression was unreadable, calm, yet beneath that calm was a coiled intensity. Finch could feel it. The man was dangerous, but he was also meticulous. Impulsive violence was a risk, but calculated violence. He could plan it like a chess move. Then he laughed. Low, short, humorless. You're very brave. I'll give you that. But bravery isn't enough. You think you can waltz into my life and rewrite reality? You think Mara walks free because you have video evidence? Evidence doesn't matter if the story isn't believed. Janet took a step forward. He's lying, she whispered. He did it. He did everything. Mara didn't. David's eyes snapped to her. Janet! His voice was sharp, slicing through the tension. Sit down now. Janet froze, then obeyed. Finch could see the subtle shake in her hands, the barely suppressed panic in her eyes. David turned back to Finch. I can make this easy for you. Walk away. Forget the flash drive, forget the videos. Don't touch my family again, or it won't end well for anyone. Finch straightened her shoulders. You've already destroyed enough lives, David. I'm not walking away. Mara's innocent, and I'm going to make sure the world knows it. That includes your lies, your manipulations, and the truth about Eli's death. You're not untouchable. His calm gaze hardened. You're very naive. You have no idea what I'm capable of. A faint shift in his posture, subtle but unmistakable, made Finch recognize the movement. He was reaching, slowly, deliberately, toward his coat pocket. In that instant, Finch's training took over. She lunged slightly to the side, forcing him to step off balance, and shouted, "Drop it!" I said, "Drop it now." David froze, hand hovering over the coat pocket. His eyes narrowed, scanning the room, calculating. Finch could see his thoughts racing. Decades of tactical experience versus raw survival instinct. Janet's breath hitched. Laura, be careful. David finally spoke, voice low and sharp. You will regret this. He pulled out. Not a gun. A cell phone. He held it high, as if about to call someone. But Finch moved, faster than he expected, and grabbed Janet's hand, pulling her toward the kitchen, creating space. Before David could react, Finch smashed the phone onto the counter. The screen cracked. Sparks flew. David's eyes widened with surprise, then narrowed with fury. You just made it personal, he said. Finch didn't flinch. It's already personal. You made Mara pay for your crimes. That ends tonight. The tension was a coiled wire ready to snap. Finch could feel it vibrating through the floorboards beneath her feet. She needed more than courage. She needed leverage. Something to force him to reveal the truth. Her eyes darted to a cabinet in the kitchen. A small digital recorder used for dictation sat there, forgotten. If she could get it, she could force him to admit what happened the night of Eli's death. She inched toward it, keeping her movements deliberate, calm. David noticed. His lips curled in a faint, dangerous smile. Trying to trap me? Clever, but not clever enough. He moved toward her, hands outstretched. Not violent yet, just controlling. Everything ends if you don't leave now. Then the unthinkable happened. A twig snapped outside. Both Janet and Finch instinctively turned toward the window. The cabin's shadow stretched long and ominous in the moonlight. Someone, or something, was approaching. David's gaze shifted. For the first time, there was uncertainty in his posture. He muttered more to himself than anyone else. It can't be. Not now. Finch realized immediately someone had followed her. Someone who knew she was coming. But the moonlight revealed a familiar figure. A tall, solid frame moving cautiously through the trees. And then, unmistakably, the figure called out in a low, authoritative voice. David Ellison, step away from the women. Now. David's jaw tightened. His eyes darted between Finch, Janet, and the shadow outside. Panic, cold, measured panic, flickered across his expression. You didn't think I'd come alone, the figure said. I've got backup. You're done. David's hand twitched toward his belt again, but Finch realized he had no real choice. His past, his entire carefully curated life, was unraveling before him. Finally, he exhaled sharply, raising his hands. Fine, he said, voice cold, brittle. But this isn't over. The figure outside moved closer, then stepped into the moonlight fully. It was Detective Finch's former partner, Mark Dalton, brought in quietly after she called him weeks ago, loyal, methodical, and ruthless in following protocol. Finch let herself relax just slightly. The threat was still real, but now it had boundaries. David Ellison, for all his manipulation and power, had finally met forces he could no longer control. And in that moment, Finch realized the truth about Mara's situation. It wasn't just about proving innocence. It was about surviving the darkness that had nearly destroyed them all. David Ellison's expression hardened as he realized the scope of his predicament. Detective Dalton's backup would arrive within minutes, and the isolation of the cabin no longer offered him the advantage he thought he had. His years of training, manipulation, and control over his family had all led to this moment of exposure. Finch didn't give him time to strategize. She stepped forward, voice calm but firm. "David, the videos, the altered crime scene, Mara's diary, we have everything. This isn't a bluff. It's time to admit the truth." David's eyes flicked to Janet, who sat frozen, tears streaming down her face. The weight of his lies, the years of silencing his wife, pressed on him. Yet his pride would not allow complete capitulation. "You think you can destroy me with a few recordings?" He spat. "You think you know the whole story?" "I know enough to get Mara out of prison," Finch shot back. "And enough to make sure you answer for every single violation. Tampering with evidence, obstruction of justice, abuse. You've built a house of cards, David, and it's collapsing now." The cabin's atmosphere felt electric, like the air itself had become tense with anticipation. David swallowed hard, glancing toward the window where Dalton's shadow lingered. Panic flashed across his eyes, the first real crack in his armor. Finally, he spoke, voice low, venomous, but resigned. "Fine," he muttered. "I did it. I shot him. It was an accident, but I panicked. I couldn't let her see him like that. I had to make it look like her fault." Janet gasped audibly, burying her face in her hands. Finch kept her composure, recording every word. "Why frame Mara?" she asked. "Because," David said, voice breaking now. "She's too smart. She could have told anyone. She would have ruined me, and I couldn't lose control. Not after everything." Silence followed. Finch didn't speak, didn't move. The weight of his confession pressed heavily into the room. The truth had been revealed, but the damage was already done. Mara had spent months in solitary fear, and Eli's death had left a family fractured beyond repair. Dalton stepped inside, nodding at Finch. "We've got him." No sudden moves. David raised his hand slowly, surrendering. Finch guided Janet out of the kitchen, whispering reassurances. For the first time in over a year, Janet exhaled fully, the fear in her eyes beginning to dissipate. The next step was legal, but no less intense. With David's confession and the flash drive evidence, Finch and the DA coordinated to reopen Mara's case. The courtroom was packed, every seat taken by journalists, families, and legal teams. Mara entered, older now in the way prison ages a child, but her eyes held a quiet strength. When Finch met her gaze, there was a silent acknowledgement. The nightmare was nearly over. The judge presiding over the reopened trial listened carefully as Finch presented the evidence. The recordings, the inconsistencies in the original crime scene report, and David Ellison's detailed confession. David's demeanor was cold, defensive, but the facts were undeniable. Experts verified the videos, forensic teams confirmed the bullet trajectories, and Janet's testimony, her first public declaration in over a year, sealed the credibility of Mara's claims. The jury deliberated for only 2 days. When they returned, the verdict was unequivocal. Mara Ellison was innocent. The courtroom erupted. Mara broke down, tears streaming, her mother rushing to embrace her. Finch allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Not triumph, but relief. Justice, long delayed, had finally arrived. David Ellison was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The media covered the case extensively, exposing the dark layers of manipulation, abuse, and corruption that had allowed a 16-year-old to be blamed for her brother's death. But the story didn't end there. Mara struggled with the aftermath. Years of mistrust, fear, and trauma could not be erased by a verdict. Therapy, counseling, and the unwavering support of Finch and her mother became her new foundation. Janet and Mara moved away, choosing anonymity over media attention. They lived quietly, rebuilding trust and family bonds fractured by years of fear. Mara's intelligence and resilience became her shield and weapon, a reminder that even the most carefully constructed illusions could be dismantled by truth and courage. Finch, meanwhile, returned to her precinct, carrying the weight of every life affected by the case. The Ellison investigation would be remembered as a study in deception, psychological manipulation, and the devastating consequences of unchecked power within a family. But most importantly, it was a testament to one simple truth. Even the smallest voice of truth can shatter the most carefully built lies. Mara would never forget Eli, nor the shadow of fear that hung over her teenage years. But she was free, and that freedom, hard-earned and blood-stained, was more than a legal victory. It was survival. 5 years had passed since the courtroom's final gavel. The world had moved on, but Mara hadn't. She lived in a quiet town in Oregon now, far from the glare of media cameras and the whispers of neighbors who remembered the Ellison tragedy. She worked at a local bookstore, a place filled with the scent of paper and ink, where she could lose herself in worlds that made sense, worlds where endings were not as cruel, and where justice, though fictional, was always served. Her mother, Janet, had built a modest home nearby. Their lives were simple, almost painfully normal. Yet beneath the calm surface flowed currents of tension, memories, and caution. Mara still flinched at sudden loud noises, still checked locks twice before sleeping, and still recoiled at raised voices. Freedom had come legally, but freedom of mind took longer to reclaim. At 21, Mara had grown into a quiet strength, one honed by trauma. People in town thought she was reserved, polite, maybe a little odd, but no one suspected the depth of her past. Occasionally, she caught herself staring out the window, thinking of Eli, and wondering how different life might have been if that night had never occurred. Grief, guilt, and survival intertwined in ways she could never fully untangle. She kept a journal, a habit she had maintained since childhood. But now the words were not frantic. They were measured. She wrote of small victories, finishing a novel, helping a customer, teaching herself piano, and of quiet moments of fear, shadows that lingered in corners, whispers in her mind she could not fully erase. Janet, meanwhile, carried her own scars. Living under David's control for years had left invisible wounds. She still jumped at the sound of footsteps at night, and she often found herself scanning the horizon as though waiting for a ghost. But her bond with Mara, now fortified by survival and truth, was unbreakable. Together they were a new kind of family, wary, cautious but unshakably connected. One rainy evening, Mara received a letter from Detective Laura Finch. It was brief, typed, professional, yet edged with warmth. Mara, justice has been served, but remember, healing is ongoing. You survived something no one should. Keep writing your story and never let anyone take your voice again. LF Mara read it twice, her eyes wet. She put it aside, then picked up her pen, opening her journal. She wrote of fear and loss, yes, but also of courage, of endurance, and of the rare, fragile beauty of survival. Years later, when Mara would look back at the Ellison case, she would remember not only the terror but also the truth. That even in the darkest circumstances, a single person willing to see and act upon the truth could change everything. David Ellison remained in prison, his attempts to appeal dismissed. The media moved on, the neighbors forgot. But the shadow of his actions would always linger over the lives he touched. Mara could not forget Eli, nor could she forgive entirely, but she could live. And for someone who had spent her formative years behind bars and under the threat of a father's violence, that was victory enough. On a quiet morning, Mara stepped outside into the sunlight. The rain had passed, leaving the world washed and fresh. She breathed deeply, feeling the wind on her face, listening to the distant birds. For the first time in a long time, she felt something approaching peace. Not the oblivion of forgetting, but the fragile, painstaking kind of peace that comes with surviving a life designed to break you and refusing to be broken. And as she walked back inside, closing the door gently behind her, Mara knew this. Life could be cruel, shocking, and unfair. But sometimes, if you survived the storm, you could stand in the light, free, unshaken, and finally, entirely your own.